we're Resolve. I'm Seth, I'm Akil, and Seth is the other one. And today, I think what we're going to try and do is talk a little bit about a little reflection on some of the work that we do, some of the work that we had disrupted by Corona, and then looking into a few other things that people are doing at the moment and this time. But I think the real key part of this for us is to ask you guys and to have a real frank and open discussion with everyone here about the role of engagement at this time, and not just about how it can be done, but whether it should be done at all. What's the point? So really try and get that one open out. So I don't know if everyone knows. I'm sure everyone's probably better at this than me, but there's a whole raising your hand thing. And when it comes to discussion time, rather than just popping your mic off and just going on a mad one, press the raise your hand button and someone will see it, and then we can answer you, and you unmute you can chat. So yeah, those are the ground rules. I hope everyone can hear and that my mic isn't all crazy. And yeah, so I'm going to share my screen, and then we're gonna get going.
I'm back, by the way.
Are you in it? Is my screen shared? Can you see it? All right, cool. So yeah, like we said, we're Resolve. We're an interdisciplinary design studio, so we look between art, architecture, technology, and engineering to address social issues. A lot of our work comes in different forms, and as a brief overview to some of those forms, I'm getting a little weird, definitely. Some of the it can be broadly categorized into installation work and workshopping. So a lot of the installation work can take all these different forms on, and one of them is public facing. So this was an installation that we did in Brixton in 2016 in St. Matthew's Church Gardens, which platformed a number of community events, performances, workshops, talks, film screenings, a different artist exhibition every day. It was heavily program led. And it also had an engagement facet to it. So we worked with a group of 80 year nines to look at kind of innovative ways of waterproofing the pavilion. We also do a lot of work within art and cultural institutions. So this was some work that we did in collaboration with the Science Gallery Young Leaders, the Science Gallery in London. This was really looking at exploring the idea of anxiety as both a biological and a cultural phenomenon, looking at anxiety as explicitly a physical experience, whether through the effects on personal neurological systems or collective emotional states. And we looked at how kind of physical activity can read, address, and kind of rethink some of these conditions. We used a number of different kind of techniques to turn old t-shirts into yarn, which became the kind of spatial currency for the space. Another one, it was a project with the Tate in November, in November. And this was for the launch of a collaborative publication with Tate Collective and a gallery in Rotterdam called Tent, called Where Does Culture Happen? And this really looked at a cross between London's corner shops and Rotterdam's bodegas as the set of convivial and contested cultural relationships. And the stage for global and local circuits of value. So we took different materials from all over different corner shops in London and kind of recomposed and reconfigured that into a platform for these kind of exchanges, which lasted over the weekend. Also collaborating with a group in Peckham called Rose to Hoya, and in looking at the facades of corner shops and reinterpreting them through Dutch African fabrics. Another installation within a cultural institution was a project that we did in Berlin, in the House of Culture in the Welt, which looked at Thomas Schellen's computational model of segregation. And building on some of these, we looked at the idea of the separation and using recycled market crates, we looked at how we could reimagine and kind of interrogate these ideas of separation and division in our societies. In Sheffield last summer, we had a project which explored the idea of emotional mapping, building on ideas from Kevin Lynch, but kind of augmenting them to look at the processes and performances of how emotions construct our cities. This lasted for the summer with a program of events and kind of workshops and talks. and also public-facing work. So this was with a good friend of ours and a collaborator, Farouk Agoro, which is the Brixton Bridge, which is up there now, which we can't go to because we're in the house. And really looked at this, embracing the idea of Afro-Caribbean heritage in Brixton, but really marked it as well, looking at how that impacts the built environment and how we can leave our mark of the built environment too as well. So workshops also make up a significant part of what we do, working with all sorts of groups and different demographics and engaging them in processes in the built environment. So this was a project in Hull that we led with a group of 3 primary schools with children ages 6 to 8, looking at, so we developed a curriculum, engaging curriculum with the 3 primary schools through which they could explore this idea of the future of their city and explore current regeneration going on now. This was a workshop that we led with the Access Project in Loughborough Junction in 2017, looking at how sight and how sound affects and kind of builds our environments. So we looked at creative ways of looking at how sound can create space and vice versa. This was in a workshop that we did at the Building Centre for ISOR's Imprint Fair in December. And this was a really interesting project where we looked at the impact of print and zines and kind of self-publishing on the built environment, looking specifically at kind of like radical racial magazines in the 60s, 70s and 80s, but also contemporary zines, Skin Deep, these kind of things, Kidin Magazine, presently, and looking at how they kind of shape our neighborhoods and our cities. And so we developed a technique of printing, kind of DIY printing that you can do very, very cheaply with Corum's Youth Centre, which is an amazing kind of youth centre in Camden. And so from an array of projects, from building and installation work to kind of really hands-on workshops, the crux of a lot of our work is to bring people together. And I think bringing people together in spaces that they might not otherwise have access to, and to kind of radically improve or radically change how that space is perceived, is a huge part of what we try and do. So I guess, as you can imagine, COVID has really thrown a spanner in the works on that MO. But I guess one of the pluses that we can be here today with everyone who's come through and really kind of talk about how that can change. So before we go into a few more wider things and like parallel engagements that are happening at this moment that we've been looking into, Seth's going to go into a project that we were delivering, but got stopped because of our boy COVID-19. Seth, you there?
Yeah, Akil, if you just jump on mute, so there's no echo. Got it. So, that's not any better, is it? Yeah, that is. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about our project on Tustin Estate. So this is a kind of a redevelopment of an estate just off Old Kent Road, in which we were supporting the design team led by DSDHA Architects and supported by Kennedy Woods and Hayhurst & Co. So we were part of a kind of 4-man design team that were helping deliver a series of options for the new master plan for the estate, and kind of our role was largely around community engagement, kind of how we involve a wide group of people, how we make sure that they're involved both formally and informally. So our key aims for this was just bringing people together. So bringing people together in that formal process, making sure that they had sight of the kinds of things that were being proposed, but also bringing people together informally. So through estate-wide events, through more tailored workshops, and kind of through specific creative activities. And then finally, just looking at the role of participation in the future. So thinking about how participation and how some of these events might last in the future when we leave the estate. Sorry, there's another point that we were trying to do is kind of bring different views to the table. So working with different communities that might not be represented in these usual processes and trying to get them involved as well. It's important to understand that this took a while and it took a lot of commitment, even to kind of reap small rewards. It meant that we were kind of there a lot, spent a lot of time on the estate, trying to get to know the people and trying to work with those people. The diagram that you can see is our kind of initial approach to this problem or this challenge, which was thinking about the wider area. So not just the estate, as you can see highlighted in purple, but thinking about all the cultural assets that complemented that area, so that when we're thinking about people, when we're thinking about kind of future participation in communities, we're not doing it in a vacuum, we're doing it connected to other resources. Just if you go on to the next slide. So the way we did this was through two methods. The first was just general engagement. So this was an idea by one of the architects in Kennedy Woods, which is just to kind of pull up in front of the school, the main school, which is within the estate, and just hand out kind of free coffee, free food to the parents in the morning, because we knew how important this school was. And we wanted to kind of galvanize support. We wanted to direct people to all of the resources that they could use, but also we just wanted to build up a bit of rapport within the estate. So we did this kind of every Thursday. We'd be out there handing out coffee and just getting to know the individuals. That would then kind of lead them onto this drop-in that we used to do every week. So every Thursday evening, at least two members of the design team would be available on a drop-in on the estate, just to kind of answer any questions and show them some of the progress that we've been making. If you go to the next slide. So this is just an example, because the coffee cart actually had wheels. So when we went in the morning, we could kind of then wheel it around the rest of the estate to make sure that we kind of spoke to any residents who might be out for a walk in the morning, and just make sure that they knew who we were and knew what we were doing there, just to kind of build up that relationship. And then the second approach that we had was, it's a more kind of tailored engagement. So this is thinking about not just the kind of not just the master plan process and not just the kind of options appraisal that we wanted people to get involved in, but also how might we do other activities that kind of work with people in the community and kind of share the opportunity that's being given here, or the opportunity that we're trying to generate here. So this included firstly a community garden, in which we collaborated with a friend and a kind of colleague of mine, Joel de Mowbray, who kind of designed and delivered this community garden in one of the open spaces within Tustin. So that's something that we just completed the build on that, and we're about to do a launch. We also did, if you go to the next one, a youth workshop. So this was where we targeted young people, I think probably aged like 11 to kind of 20, 25 on the estate, and just put up a load of flyers. And we wanted to try and get them to kind of get their voice across within the master plan process, but also just to interact with some of the principles that we as designers interact with when we're thinking about the future of people's estates and the future of people's homes. So here we did a mapping workshop where they started to really investigate their area and think about some of the kind of some of the key sites for them in their area, and then how that might then influence how they think about their estate. And then we designed a few kind of interventions, like light-hearted interventions, that they created with some leftover material based on some of those challenges that they previously stated, or some of those kind of points that they previously noted in their area. This also, we wanted this to be a kind of to live beyond the workshop. So what we wanted to try and do is set up a youth working group where people could, where kids, could integrate with the master plan principles and the master plan process through this working group. So we would kind of work with them, and they would attend the meetings that we had with the local authority, with the design team, and try and get some of their kind of views heard and integrate with the process in a bit more of a kind of managed way, because some of these children, as you can see, are quite young. And then if you go to the next one. And then some of the other things that we had planned. So just before it stopped, we were about to do an event cookout, which was basically just like a way of bringing people together, a way of trying to encourage people to come out of their houses and understand a bit more about what's going on their doorstep, and also learn about some of the opportunities that might be arising in the future, and just a way of kind of celebrating some of the work that we've been doing with people. Then we also wanted to do an alternative careers fair as well, and that was more focused on like, what are the kind of skills that exist within the estate. How can people from the estate be invited to kind of share and understand more about those skills? So what are some of the jobs that people do? What are some of the initiatives that people have started themselves? And then also we invited people from the local community. So that map that we first showed, that was our way of identifying some of the interesting projects going on. We wanted to invite them to the estate so they could share some of the work, and we could kind of get this like ecosystem going a little bit. So the things that are important for this is that we kind of were really heavily reliant on collaboration. So this is a picture of a kind of design collective from London called People's Place. And they were pivotal for us in kind of working with us to get the events sorted, to get the community garden set up, but also to think about this afterlife for some of the projects. So how can the community garden then be handed over to the residents, and how can that be kind of run and managed in the future? We also, as I mentioned, worked with Joel de Mowbray, who kind of helped us in the build. But then we also had the kind of a really important element, which was working with local residents as well. So two women that we met in the coffee drop-in. So the kind of the first things that we did to really put ourselves out there. They actually took up a really kind of important role in helping us with the careers fair and the cookout, in identifying like local people who wanted to cook food, who wanted to meet new people, who had businesses that they wanted to kind of share with people, and also in the community garden to help people kind of galvanize a bit of support, and also think about how this might be managed in the future. So that there was this kind of heavy focus on collaboration. And then finally, as I mentioned, it's, you know, because we were really going at this completely cold, like, you know, we had the contacts that we had on the estate with the people that we met through this process. So people that we met through kind of resident groups, people that we met through the design team. But apart from that, we were really just trying to galvanize support just off the cuff. So that meant that we had to kind of go above and beyond to make sure that we had a presence on the estate and make sure that people really could see and understand what we were doing. So this is an example of some of the kind of interesting like signage techniques that we did with the youth workshop posters. So we printed some in English and some in Spanish, because we know that there's quite a prominent like Spanish community on the Old Kent Road, and then just plastered these up on the estate so people could see what was happening, so people could kind of generate a bit of interest, and hopefully that would then knock on. And this is, you know, this is a project that actually just kind of midway through this kind of COVID crisis hit, and the events that we had planned for April, the kind of workshops we had planned, the fairs, it was all postponed until further notice. The whole program itself kind of came to a halt. And with that, all of the kind of energy and the relationships and the kind of support that we kind of worked hard to build up over that period of time kind of came to a halt. Yeah, back to you in the studio. I think you're on mute, mate.
Hold on, what's going on? Okay, oh shit, I'm here. Sorry, apologies for swearing. We're back. So yeah, and that brings us to the kind of present time, and looking at how different people in this climate have been participating or engaging in if at all. And I think which is really important to share. We have a project that's ongoing at the moment, the details of which we can't disclose, but something that's forcing us to think about how we adapt to these changing times. And so these are some of the things that we've been looking at the moment. One of them I think is kind of obvious, which is like digital platforms. So Participatory City, who are based in Barking and Dagenham, have set up their participatory platform, Everyone Every Day, which is a lot like a kind of social media site where anyone can kind of join. You don't necessarily have to have a profile to get in, and then kind of information is arranged by a topic, so you can see things about like information about things that happen close to you. You can take part in polls and look at online events and these kind of things. Really set up in a kind of platforming way. Again, like not necessarily based on like a pre-existing community, but also but heavily reliant on that form as well. And a lot of other digital platforms, I think, in the wake of this, also probably quite important to acknowledge. So you have your like Citizens Lab, a lot of these kind of based in America, the Citizens Lab, Co-Urbanized, which is on the right. Another one where you can kind of different people can log in to talk about different issues. And on the right, there's an example of how traffic can be mediated through people reporting what's going on. On the left is Decidim, so anyone familiar, I think, with the Barcelona context, that was the improvement on the 010, 010, so the 010 call line where you could call in and kind of discuss civic issues with the civic authority. And then bottom right as well as Neighbourland. And for more like kind of digital platform initiatives like this, an academic called Shannon Matten's a really important source. She has a piece in Placer Journal called Post-it Note Journal that looks at kind of important critiques of some of these. So how these have been acting through the COVID times has been a really important reference point for us. Another one is from the arts. This is an artist I'm really, really fond of called Maria Mahfouz. and her exhibition was planned for just as this whole thing started to shell it down. And what they did with leave of absence, the gallery, was to move and shift the entire thing online. And in addition to that, to have daily times at which between like 5 and 6, you could interact with the artists on Instagram, talking about some of the things that are going on, talking about some of the inspirations that are going through as well. And in addition to that as well, which I think was a really lovely touch with what Leave of Absence did, was to post to everyone's doors who signed up a kind of private viewing pack. So this had information based on like logins for inverted commas like a private view, but also for a number of different events that would have taken place during the breadth of the exhibition. And you can see through the Instagram thing how they tried to like desanitize the letters, and a really interesting way of like making that process quite transparent and also adapting it very quickly to what was going on. The second batch of kind of engagement things I think is a lot more, in some ways more trivial, but also really important to acknowledge. And this is this idea of like tailored engagement to a pre-existing fan base or to a pre-existing collective of people. This is normally done through platforms like Facebook and Instagram. On the left, you have, I think everyone knows this one here, Tory Lane's Quarantine Radio, where he got blocked recently. And as whimsical and as ridiculous as it is, a really important way of engaging, kind of using that platform. The Architecture Foundation 100 Day Studio we're on right now is a good example of that. Houseplants, there's our boy Armin, who did a charity event a weekend ago on a platform called Twitch, which is a similar kind of thing. And then also the Arts Marketing Association, which provides which are providing coronavirus support for different kind of practitioners in that field. And so they've organized a number of different kind of safe spaces, digital safe spaces, through webinars, through Facebook groups, by which people can kind of tap into their resources. And I think resource sharing and those kind of platforms is a really key way of doing this. Although I should stress it is really reliant on the existence of on like a pre-existing platform as well, and slightly different to this idea of perhaps engaging in like on a blank slate and really having to start from scratch in terms of who you're engaging and how you're creating that audience. Very lastly, or not very lastly, that word. Another group of examples I wanted to show were ones that were physical. And so physical examples of how people are communicating and engaging in the built environment, because people are still around, you know what I mean? Like people are still out and about, they're just not quite out and about in the same way. And so signage, a lot of handmade signage which has been put in, is a really interesting example of how that happens. Brendan Cormier from the B&A had that call out a week ago, I think, or did a little thing on Twitter where he asked about some of these signs, and people came back with really interesting examples of things that they had seen in their neighborhoods about people using that signage and using the built environment almost as a kind of a blank slate to inscribe into. And then lastly, an example which I think I might actually show on my computer. So this is a really fantastic, actually, you know what, let me show you on the computer. This is a really fantastic project called the Anti-Eviction Mapping Project, which is really part of the vanguard of the anti-eviction mapping movement in America, particularly in the East Coast. And what this website does in particular, if I can find it, oh, that's Maria Mahfouz on. Also, don't watch how many tabs I've got on there, it's crazy. Is to have an open mapping platform by which people can submit information about rent strikes, which are currently being organized or may be occurring in different neighborhoods. So the website's able to go down to neighborhood scale, but also zones out. And so it looks and kind of maps different zones by which officials in states have passed or are working to pass different levels of tenant protection. So you can really see that overlay of lots of different really detailed information. And if you kind of zoom into here, you can see that in Oakland, you have a number of different housing within a kind of block through which rent strikes are currently occurring. So a really interesting example of how it's done. But then again, I guess the last caveat in that as well is that topical. It is very much a product of the times and very much a product of what's going on. And so perhaps not entirely an example of how someone might be engaged in, let's say, a master planning process, or let's say like, or kind of planning process in these times. So just to end on those and to start this discussion is a quote from an academic called Agnesia Legensky. And she champions this idea of glitchy theory of platform urbanism, which is really looking at these crosses between tactical urbanism and platform urbanism, a more tactile way of expressing and kind of interrogating digital platforms and urbanism through them. So she quotes, a digital theory of platform urbanism ultimately underwrites a more hopeful platform urban politics by extending and recognizing ordinary urban denizens' abilities to express political capacity through everyday digital interactions and practices outside the bounds of acts of collective resistance, which presuppose and necessitate forms of social, political, and often economic capital, to which many do not have access. And so it's within this kind of realm, I think, is really important to stress the idea that a lot of engagement, in a very general sense, but also more so in the sense right now, is really looking at and quite specifically tailored to people who aren't acting within in the polars of kind of extreme collective resistance or quiescence. And I think it's really important to understand that spectrum and understand how. And when you're out and about and when you're like physically interacting with people, it's very easy as a practitioner, I think, to gauge that and to be respectful of those spectrums. But I think the digital does a number of things as to what we can do here. So to launch into what it is that we're going to be doing or chatting about, hope everyone's got like some food and drinks and these kind of things. These are some of the considerations that we've been thinking about when it comes to engagement in these times. So one is like personal circumstances and the precedence of personal circumstances, family circumstances, health circumstances, employment circumstances in these times over anything going on, particularly to do with perhaps with like a master plan or with these kind of things. So issues that, you know, for a lot of people are already extremely significant have only heightened in these times. And given that context, what is the role of engagement with a project, with a built environment project, if it's going on right now? The second one is digital literacy. So a lot of the groups that we try and engage with anywhere are people who are often left out of engagements and situations by which they can engage with digitally. And that's why for us it's so important to kind of get these interpersonal relationships with people and to find and talk to and kind of collaborate with people in space. And so these times which have kind of stressed an importance on how we interact digitally do risk further excluding these groups. And then lastly, the city itself has changed. So I think it's almost, maybe it sounds silly to say, but specifically for investigative work, by which your engagement is trying to draw this picture of what is going on. You're trying to paint a picture of an area, of their kind of spatial dynamics. The picture that you get at this time is going to be vastly different to the picture that you might have got previously, because the way people are using space has changed, the way people are performing in these spaces, the way people are doing these things have changed, their routines have changed, their lifestyle has changed, and their outlook has changed. And so the picture that you get as a result of that is quite different. So those are the kind of three considerations that we've been taking into account. It'd be really interesting to find out what you guys have also been thinking about and consideration that you guys might feel that we've been missing. And so what we really want to know in this discussion is, firstly, how are you guys doing it, or how is anyone doing it if they're doing it all? How are you thinking about it, or how are others thinking about it that you've heard of, that you think is a good idea, that you think is a bad idea? You know what I mean? Just whatever you want. And then lastly, and probably most importantly, like, what's the point? And is this the context in which a project could commence, or which an engagement project could commence? And if not, why so? And so without further ado, I think I'll stop the chatty patty, and then maybe we can have some conversation. So again, I tell you what, maybe we'll do it this way. Does someone want to raise their hand on the if you press the little raise hand thing, if you have a comment on any of the things that we talked about, specifically those last few questions as well, raise your hand on the thing, and then you can be heard, and then we can just go around and have this little cordial exchange.
Akil, I think your video's off.
My video off. Oh shit.
Yeah, you're.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. I actually can't see everyone as well, which is really annoying me. It's bugging me out.
If you click in the right-hand corner.
Yeah, I've been told, but like I think I've got the Wembley Market version of whatever this program's called, Zoom. Yeah. So who wants to go? Who wants to chat? Come on. I'm going to pick someone if no one puts their hand up. I'm going to pick Joseph Henry. Go on, bro. I'm going to unmute your mic. I can't unmute his mic. Rosie, could you unmute him?
You're right. You're right.
What's this?
I guess my question is. How do you use the opportunity of captive audience, as it were, and sort of existing projects as a way of expanding what those projects might be through engagement? So how do you take a housing project where you're commissioned to a housing project, and how do you use the opportunity of engagement to maybe the project isn't about housing anymore, or isn't specifically about housing at this moment, it then becomes about something else. So I'm thinking about what can your sort of engagement processes do to unlock other bits of intelligence that are needed. So for example, I was speaking to a community group earlier who we're giving them some funding for the GLA, but actually the thing they need now isn't a minibus, it's actually loads of iPads, because it's very hard to do digital community engagement if your community don't actually have the sort of physical infrastructure, the iPads, the internet connection to do things. So I'm kind of interested in that.
Very interesting. If anyone's got something to say in response to that, don't wait for me to say it. You know what I mean? Like you can by all means raise your hand, and we'll get you on the mic, get you on the ones and twos. No one wants to chat to that.
I think also people can write in the chat as well, because it's kind of hard to see everyone's hands. I think because we've got loads of pages.
Seth, do you want to say something in response to that? Let's have that.
I think you are on me again. It is an interesting one, because I guess we're going through those motions of trying to frame the challenge as an opportunity, and trying to think about like alternative methods and alternative ways of gathering information. And one of the things that we're doing in another project is, rather than going to people and just thinking about engagement on a certain topic, we're actually trying to use this time to develop a kind of wider picture of the area. So thinking about the narrative that goes within the area, thinking about some of the stories and some of the kind of, because at this moment, it's likely that people are a bit more reflective about the way that things were. And because you just have more time on your hands, you can try and capture that energy and have people kind of turn towards what some of those kind of assets within their community might be, that are separate from just the kind of the housing, retail, commercial space that we were going to have to go to them. And that's probably because of the timelines and the restrictions that we had on the timelines on these projects. So when you need to go to people and ask for a kind of a set kind of topic within a set period of time, all of a sudden you have to frame the question a lot around, the information you need. And now we probably have a bit more time to ask around that information. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's something that we're trying to pilot in the next couple of weeks, but we definitely haven't got any kind of good stories for it just yet. What do you
Another
think?
thing I'd add to that as well is like, I guess the kind of changing digital landscape is not to say that people, I think there's a lot of processes have adapted to this time. If you look at the kind of mutual dependency groups, so the mutual aid groups, a lot of the local groups that are formed in order to address the situation, you can see that civil society has really galvanized around the internet. And you know, to a lesser effect, things like this and things that are going on in different industries through the use of platforms like Zoom, Microsoft Teams, all that kind of thing, is another example of that as well. But I think it's also worth thinking about like ideas of oversaturation, how people are reacting to that information. You know what I mean? Like how people are receiving information. Like what is that? And it's not even too hard to do, because finally I think, and maybe this is one of the kind of the saving graces of what's going on, is that like finally that distinction between practitioner and stakeholder, or practitioner and like participant, especially in architecture, has been thrown into the mix a little bit, because we're all in our yards. You know what I mean? We're all sitting in our desks. We're all getting bored as hell. Everyone's at least performing a very similar situation. And so in order to imagine how engagement works with someone, perhaps you could, in this time, in a really pressing way, imagine how it would be to you. For example, like I know that I'm not even really reading my emails as much, let alone like responding to things about engagement. So I think it's an interesting one. Perhaps too much self-reflection is a bad thing in this situation, but you know, I don't know. I think it's interesting. To put the question out to anyone else as well, really that what if, and like, you know, the ethics engagement at this time, like who here, you know, maybe we could do like a little interactive exercise. Who here thinks
there's a question.
Oh, there's a question. Oh, there's a question here. Sorry. Oh, wow, tons of questions. There's not a question, just to.
Question from Evadita. I'm going to unmute you. Okay, you're unmuted.
Hello. Hi.
Hi.
So I was just thinking about how do you approach collaborations in projects, as in I'm sure every site is, you know, not somewhere where you already know people or you already know the local organizations working on similar projects. So how do you approach, you know, the process of finding out who to collaborate with? I mean, it's a very naive question, but I just want to know a little more about how do you approach collaborations to work on a project with similar, you know, interests groups.
I think it's the thing is it's a simple question, but it's a simple answer. I think we like take a lot of time at the beginning of all of our projects just to be in the area and to try and spend as much time in like little things like cafes, restaurants, kind of just walking up and down and just trying to think about like what is the actual, like what's the crack here, what's the vibe here, what is actually going on, before we then decide, oh, we're going to kind of bring in a group that we've worked in on here, a group that we've worked in there. The initial step just has to be like trying to understand what the area has and kind of what the vibe in the area is, and that helped us a lot when we were doing residencies in galleries. So when we were up in Sheffield, we were lucky that we landed in a really like solid and tight community within Sheffield, the kind of artist community. But the way that we managed to capitalize and bring in the most people through this kind of collaborative process, because we had either artists, musicians, designers, we had people in there every single week doing one thing or another, doing kind of some form of kind of creativity or expression. And the way we did that was just by spending a lot of time up there, going to different events, going to different functions, going to different places, and thinking like, okay, what does this place have to offer? And then we just rode on the back of that, and people linked us up with people, and then next thing you know, you've already got kind of a knock-on effect, and you're already building a network. But it's by taking a bit of time in the beginning to just allow things to come to you.
Okay, thank you. I would have a follow-up question also. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So I think as you increase the number of stakeholders in a project, you also increase finances, right? Like, so I mean, how do you kind of manage the funding in such cases, because there are so many stakeholders?
So when you say funding, do you mean, because all of our projects are funded by different sources. So,
Okay.
so say for example, there is a budget that goes with an installation in a gallery. There's a budget that goes with this kind of regeneration project, and that has to be divided up quite meticulously by the whole team. So then there'll be a certain amount that can go towards kind of engagement, and there'll be a certain amount that can go towards design and all of these kind of things. So we have to be kind of flexible. You have to be pretty like, you have to be pretty flexible with what you can and can't do. But as you know, like these budgets don't stretch. So it doesn't mean that you can just kind of do like massive events with loads and loads of people. And what we did when we were on the estate in Tustin is we tried to think of kind of quite small, quite high impact, but small scale. So doing things like a cookout on the estate, which just means that anyone can come down to it, anyone can kind of drop in, and all of a sudden we're sparking up a conversation. All of a sudden we're making some new connections, but it doesn't take a lot. And generally our approaches are to try and do things with either reused material or kind of some kind of upcycle process. So we try and cut costs wherever we can, to be honest.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
Khadija had a question, and then Mariana had her hand up, and also Melissa has posted. But Mel, you're part of the team. You're not allowed to post. Do you want to unmute Khadija's mic?
I've unmuted Marianne.
Yeah,
Right,
hi.
okay.
I think I've been unmuted, so hopefully it's working for me. Am I echoed? Really bad.
No?
No? Okay. So I'm working on a project for a local authority, and it relies on engagement quite heavily. And we were kind of maybe 1/3 into the project when lockdown happened. So again, quite a challenging / interesting situation. So I just want to share a little bit about what we did in response to your questions. So we're architects, and then we're working with a placemaking consultant who does a lot of the interviews. And then we've also got a local artist group on board. And the artist group was supposed to organize workshops with the different groups of the local community. And it felt like both our client and us obviously wanted to carry on with the project as much as possible after lockdown. So it was decided that the artist group was going to organize online activities instead of the workshops. So we're kind of trying to tap into the fact that people have to stay at home. Kids are staying at home. So kind of, I guess, trying to tap into that opportunity, and the activities offered are targeted at people staying at home, kids staying at home. They can print things out, draw things, and then it hasn't happened yet, so I don't know how successful it will be, but hopefully then they will send back their work, and that can somehow come together and feed into the process. But yeah, one of the challenges was the fact that, for example, we were like taking the artists did this like online treasure trail of one of the roads in the area, and I think it's really nice because they recorded an audio, so you hear someone's voice talking about the street, and it feels like it's a nice kind of connection. But obviously we're talking about a road, and people have to tell us about a road that they can't use at the moment. So that's one of the strange things. And then the other one is the local authority, their communication channels are, well, they're dominated by the health crisis information. So the local authority is no longer going to promote the project. And then I suppose they also don't want to be seen as kind of bearing the engagement on the project in this busy time. So yeah, it's just what I wanted to share.
That's really interesting. And so, and just a final question for you as well. Like, what are the channels you're going out through to reach the kids?
So the online activities are hosted on the artist's website, and they're going to promote it on social media, etc. But they just kind of compose those activity packs and template packs. And it's essentially a series of activities that you can either print at home if you got a printer, or you just kind of listen or read the instructions and then you just draw. So it's fairly low-key as far as online activities go. And I suppose we're relying on the artist group already having like a good reputation in that area. So we're kind of using their platform.
Yeah, really interesting. Thank you for that. I can see a few more questions. There's wait, Khadija, do you wanna actually ask the question, or should we just answer? Maybe you can write in the thing to say yes or no.
Taking my mute off.
Oh yeah.
Hi, what was the question? What did you say to me about my question?
If you wanted to ask it for everyone to hear.
Well, I'm an engagement officer for a local authority, and I've written in the question is, are you currently holding engagement sessions? Because it sounds as if you are talking about a time before COVID-19 in terms of the things that you've been very successful at, and some of the engagement processes you've used to get young people, for example, and primary age children involved in what's happening in the built environment. And then I put another question, because I was thinking as you were speaking, how do you engage anyone about a future that is so uncertain? And then I started to, because the meeting was continuing, obviously, because lots of people are putting questions in, I started to look back at some of the things that you'd said, and I thought, well, yeah, I really liked the stuff around, I think you called it platform urbanism, where kind of taking the challenge that COVID-19 has is and turning it on its face and kind of getting people to use the areas that they're now occupying, albeit under lockdown, to express themselves, express how they are now relating to those spaces. Because the way in which they may have felt a week or 2 weeks ago, I mean, it's changing week by week, is very different to the way they would have felt 6 months ago, when we were just sending letters out to them and inviting them to get involved in something great that we're about to build in their local town centre, for example. Those things are just not going forward in the way that they were before, for obvious reasons, because of I can't remember the name of the lady that spoke before, but she talked about the local authority being very busy, just trying to deal with things like food provision and things like that, and getting people, helping local businesses. So I think that we've kind of paused a bit, and we're looking more at some of the desperate needs out there, as opposed to some of the more challenging things around how we're going to engage people in the future of the area that they live in, and what that might look like. And I'm really interested in how we might actually consider those things. I think you've put down, you said 3 questions. How are you doing it? My answer to that is that we're not. How are you and others thinking about it? Not really thinking about it. I would say I have a lot of involvement with youth engagement, and we're trying to kind of like harness the fact that although they usually are quite a difficult cohort to get involved in the stuff that we want to talk to them about in terms of what we're trying to do in the area, I personally think that now that everything's online, it almost could or should make it easier, because I know that young people tend to be easier to contact online than they would leave their home and come to a space somewhere to talk about what's happening in the area. So I've been looking at ways around that. And the stuff about, and where you asked about, is what's the point? I think there's even more point now than there was before to engage, because when I look outside my window and I see people jogging, and I see people on my road that I've never seen before, and it would be interesting to get their take on what the world looks like to them now. What does their local area mean to them now? Because it's a very different place now. It's not what it was last week or the week before. So there is definitely a reason to engage, because there's so much that we now, as people that are accustomed to working with communities around involving them in what's happening, there's so much we now don't know about communities, because everything's changed, everybody's changed, and it's a whole new world out there. And I was thinking when you were talking, how do I now go out there and try to have a conversation with people about things that I personally think right now just really don't matter to them? And how do we, I don't know, I don't want to make anything matter to anyone. I think I want to hear what matters to them, but at the same time, my job is very confined in terms of what I'm employed to talk to people about.
Get in the bed now.
Get into bed. Sorry, I'm not. No, it's not my bedtime quite yet. No. But I'm just kind of like keen to. I just want to hear some comments about that, about what I feel personally, that I'm not even engaging with the people I would normally talk to. What I'm doing is asking them, "How are you doing?" Let me know. If it's an organisation, I might ask them, you know, how are you diverting the things that you used to do? In what way are you working with your communities of interest now, for example? And I'm finding that the wealth in terms of community belongs in community. Now I'm finding that I'm looking out there and thinking, you know, when I look at the heroes on the street, the people who are surviving this thing, and I think it's an exciting time to engage, but I personally don't know where to start in as far as trying to get people to even think about talking about what's happening or what may happen in the future in the area that I work in. So just looking at all the stuff that you've done is brilliant, but I'm kind of thinking, how do we get people to start thinking like that again, about a future that they don't know if it's going to, you know, what's going to happen to the high street? You know, will there be the same businesses on the high street in the next 6 months? You know, it's so uncertain. So it's difficult to engage people on a topic that doesn't seem to have any real context or any real aim or future.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Akil. That's such an insightful reflection. I want to try and get all the people who've got their hands up as well to say what they need to say. And I'm just going to read out 2 of the questions that are in the group at the moment, and then we can go to Gonzalo and Olive, who've got their hands up and been patiently waiting. One was by Alex, which is saying, how do you now perceive participation given all of the COVID lessons? Another one was from Tom, who apologizes for being too shy to put the camera off. Put the camera on. No worries, Tom, it's all right. And I have a public consultation in the next month for an infill scheme on a very rundown estate in South London with lots of transient residents. We're really struggling to attract residents of the estate itself to previous events, and hosting the next one online won't make it any easier. Any thoughts on good routes for digital outreach in communities like this? So also, if anyone has any thoughts on those questions, they can also post them in the group as well. Because I think they're both really interesting questions to be answered. So Gonzalo, I know your hand's been up, so do you want to unmute your mic, and then afterwards we can get Olive's question too.
Hey, can you hear me? Yeah, cool. Well, thank you so much for your talk. I think it was really good because I'm very familiar with your practice lately, and it was really good to see like how you are like now looking at digital format that could like help to nurture the kind of project that you're already doing. My question is in particular about like one of the projects that is Common Thread. That's the one that you did for the Science Gallery. In that one, you were like tackling the issue of anxiety through different societies and cultures and ages. And anxiety is something that it has been discussed a lot, like in these times, that this lockdown is generating like a lot of anxiety. And I was wondering, like, if you could expand a little bit more about like how the whole process of the collaborative process in that particular project was like tackling the issue of anxiety, and also like whether the different platforms that you were presenting, digital platform that you were presenting, whether there would be like any kind of opportunity in those to create a kind of remote collaboration with other people to create like physical stuff, because I think like one of the things that it's key about your practice is how you collaborate like one-to-one, like with the people, like face-to-face, and also about like the physical materialization of your project, like there is a physical output on those. So do you think like there would be like an opportunity now to try to think about like this kind of more remote collaboration, and whether that do you think like it will help also like to tackle like the kind of anxiety that the lockdown is producing? And also I wanted to make a comment on that previous question about like this community engagement with a certain like neighborhood, that there were like some fear that making them digital might not work for them. And I think it's a moment for testing, and for testing like other things. I mean, like there might be like many people that won't be able to like join like physically to that meeting, but I think it's a moment for like, like being more open. I think like the fact that there is now like, and there've been like 100 people like joining these, most of them are going to be probably quiet, but that engagement is also a sort of engagement in a way. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Gonzalo. That's two really good questions. I think, well, Rosie, do you reckon we can run a little time? Is that all right? We're not going to get the axe pulled on us when we go over 8 o'clock.
I think let's keep it for like another 10 minutes or so, if that's okay.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay, I'll be super brief, and then I'll get to Olive's question, and then there's Karen's question as well. So just on the one about common thread, so we really looked at this idea of anxiety being a physical condition in both the neurological and a cultural sense. So like, how does cultural anxiety manifest in like members of a diaspora in London, but also how does it affect the plasticity of the brain? And that's something that we kind of worked with researchers in King's College about, but also talked in real depth with the young leaders, with the young people's group in there. And so we came to this idea of doing something physical is not just like not something therapeutic. I think therapeutic is to over-assign it, but it was really about how you can work your way through that, and how you might read your condition, or how you might look at these conditions, or kind of rethink it, if not just momentarily. So the process of making and the process of weaving and building that installation up was very much a kind of chance to reflect. In terms of how we get other people to then do the processes, because as you said, it's super important for us. The digital isn't necessarily hampering for that. One thing we're doing with the project that we've got in Germany and Braunschweig is we're digitalizing the methods, so everyone can make them at home. And a lot of the techniques we do can be made at home. You could find a YouTube tutorial about it. You probably do it better than us. And so that's really like important way for us to try and disseminate that. So maybe during these times, people might try and make a brick from newspaper, or make yarn from old t-shirts, these kind of things. So I hope I didn't answer that too rushly. But then who's the person who had? There's something hand. Oh, Olive. Do you want to unmute your mic and
Hi. I just wanted to thank you very much. Your talk was very interesting. I just wanted to share my own experience. I've just graduated, and looking for a job is really difficult right now. And I found that I'm getting more engaged in things like this, online, various projects run by different practices that I wouldn't otherwise have done if I was working in an office and had my attention elsewhere. So I think it's like other people have said, it's an exciting time. And I just wanted to mention that so I'm involved with a religious organization, and there's plenty of old people who are finding themselves stuck at home alone at the moment, and they've organized Zoom meetings like this quite regularly every week, and they've become more involved in their community where they wouldn't otherwise have been if they were if we weren't all stuck at home. And so my question is, because architecture often houses these kind of meetings that people usually have either in a church or in a community. So what do you think, where do you think, what direction will architecture take when this is all over? Because obviously, even when we can eventually go outside again, there'll still be restrictions or a kind of a fear of sort of meeting in bigger groups. So what happens when, what happens if we can no longer house these activities?
I think that's a really, really important question. I'm not going to personally answer that right now, because I'm also going to get Karen to say a question before we get the whole kind of the countdown clock on us. I think that's a really important thing to reflect on about how, and very similar to Khadijah's one about, how given that things definitely will change, given the only thing we really know is that something will change drastically after this, how do we adapt our practice to be most appropriate in this time?
Wait, Akil, just on that point. Right, you mute your mic, it's going to echo. Just quickly on that point that you made, Olive, I think the question that Tom raised actually is kind of the other side of the coin for that, because I think even as architects kind of in this design industry have the kind of the ability to create these spaces where these questions are going to be asked and answered, and people will be looking to kind of do things in a different way after this crisis. There are still going to remain communities that have always been kind of hard to engage with and will continue to be hard to reach, or whatever we call them. And it's kind of like, I think we do owe it to ourselves after all of this to actually get back out there, go back out into those spaces just as aggressively as we were before, because that's really like that. We can't stress enough how when we are trying to do what we're doing and trying to kind of work with different people in different communities, how kind of being there and having those physical interactions and developing those relationships with people, how important that is, and how many more opportunities it does open up. And I think if we kind of focus too much on the digital platforms that we've used so well in this period, we might then forget the effect of being out on the ground.
Karen, do you want to round us off with your question?
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah, so my name's Will. I'm actually using my girlfriend's account. So basically I wanted to share kind of an experience of currently project that I'm working on at my practice, where we're in the middle of a stage 2 concept design for a community garden project. And it was we were in the middle of it when we had to kind of start working remotely. And it kind of interestingly kind of brought up kind of 2 answers, I think, to questions that have been written in the chat, which are to do with how we've kind of continued engaging with the community to kind of keep the project pushing forward. And we had to switch to kind of weekly meetings through Zoom. And we actually found that more people turned up through the Zoom meetings because they actually felt safer to kind of participate more anonymously, and also kind of also less effort, obviously, because normally we meet in this one area nearby where everyone lived, but it's still kind of, for us as well, it was kind of an hour from the office, and for a lot of people it still took time to get there after work. So it was a big bonus to do it online, and people were more engaged, and it was kind of easier for us to present the progress of the project, of the design, and get the feedback really quickly and really concisely. And then I think kind of as an answer to, or a kind of point to Tom's question about kind of engaging with residents, I think it must be really tough, and I can't imagine how you would start kind of engaging with people now if you're trying to start a project. But I think with the example that we had, there was this really good app that the locals seemed to use, which is called Nextdoor, where through there they kind of were very quickly able to spread, share news about any engagement or consultations that they could kind of that were happening or could happen in the future. And I think also a lot of resident groups are kind of there that you don't know about, the kind of underground that I think you could try to tap into if you try to reach out to communities and still kind of run engagement projects at this time. So yeah, that's kind of all I wanted to say.
Thanks for that, Will. I think that's a really great kind of point to end on. Really kind of great insight to end on that one. So yeah, oh wow, there's a massive one here. Cool. So there's a little conversation going on in the group chat. I mean, if you guys want to keep the chat going, I don't know. You know, I mean, like we can end the call, but it'd be nice to. I don't know how this continues. I don't know. I mean, but I think it's definitely something that's worth talking more about. We've got another session next Tuesday, so if anyone's around and wants to just keep the chin wagon going, and then for sure we can catch up then.